Raman the Pharaoh was the current heir and ruler of this country. Raman the Pharaoh's cat, named Cleopatra, had swallowed a tiny capsule containing a small entity named Barticello Lopotamus. It was a being from a different planet and was there in Raman the Pharaoh's country as an emissary to bring life-saving instructions for dealing with a series of plagues and pestilence. Raman the Pharaoh had called a cat healer and psychic surgeon in a nearby village for purposes of safely removing the small capsule. Raman the Pharaoh called a delivery service to send a vehicle with air conditioning and a trained driver to pick up Cleopatra the cat in her travel-approved container to deliver to the cat healer and psychic surgeon, and then either to wait and return Cleopatra the cat to Raman the Pharaoh, or if the cat healer and psychic surgeon needed to keep Cleopatra the cat for a few days to leave her there, at which time, when the capsule extraction procedure was completed and Cleopatra the cat was ready to return, the cat healer and psychic surgeon would call the delivery service, and the same driver then would come and deliver Cleopatra the cat back to Raman the Pharaoh. To avoid any possibility of Cleopatra the cat escaping from the space travel approved container, Raman the Pharaoh had locked the container with a special lock, which instead of using a key, used digits on rotating dials. And to prevent the delivery driver being able to release Cleopatra the cat inside the delivery vehicle, Raman the Pharaoh did not give the lock code to the delivery driver. To further ensure the safety and successful delivery and return of Cleopatra the cat, Raman the Pharaoh had instructed the delivery driver that she would be given a generous tip upon successful completion of the delivery and return of Cleopatra the cat. Raman the Pharaoh was a very diligent and at times obsessive leader, and consequently had a small instruction booklet prepared and had given this to the delivery driver. It had instructions for the delivery driver and the cat healer and psychic surgeon, as well as the cat healer and psychic surgeon's two assistants, a pair of twins named Belinda and Glinda, who were cousins of Melinda Bourgeoisie, the singer and romantic interest of Tito Ramon, the leader of a Cuban swing orchestra. In the same way that frogs and munificent and his 5 noses in the higher dimensions were smaller than jelly beans, Barticello Lopotamus was even smaller in the dimensions of Raman the Pharaoh's country. Due to a series of executive mistakes that Raman the Pharaoh made, his country was being subjected to a series of plagues and pestilence. Barticello Lopotamus had traveled to Raman the Pharaoh's country for purposes of protecting Raman the Pharaoh and his people from the various plagues and pestilence. Barticello Lopotamus' spaceship was very tiny, and in an unfortunate series of circumstances had landed his spaceship atop a bowl of tasty tuna fish that Cleopatra the cat was enjoying. This resulting in Cleopatra the cat inadvertently swallowing Barticello Lopotamus' spaceship and thereby creating the catastrophic event where Barticello Lopotamus, the emissary from a far distant planet, was now inside Cleopatra the cat. Barticello Lopotamus was still inside his spaceship, so was in no harm or discomfort, but being at least temporarily inside Cleopatra the cat, only was able to converse with Raman the Pharaoh via electromagnetic communication equipment, foretelling Raman the Pharaoh what to do. Since, as everyone now knows, electromagnetic communication can be deciphered and eavesdropped, which would let the Pilbertons, colleagues of the Daltons, know that Raman the Pharaoh was aware of their machinations in the quest to disturb Raman the Pharaoh and the people of his country by casting upon them a series of plagues and pestilence, something which not be conducive to Raman the Pharaoh and the people of his country. Why was Raman the Pharaoh so important that the Pilbertons, working in cooperation with the Dolphins, felt it necessary to intervene by releasing a series of plagues and pestilence to convince Raman the Pharaoh that using the newly discovered and understood technologies would not be the brightest idea? What were these new technologies? In the early years and continuing to move forward, Raman the Pharaoh and his ancestors had discovered a completely and differently new technology, which was more magical than physical in the sense of indirectly rather than directly enabling the manipulation, modification, and transformation of the tiny particles, electrons, neutrons, protons, combined into atoms and molecules that were so well known in the latter years of the 27th century Earth. Raman the Pharaoh's ancestors had traveled by special spaceships to the planet Earth for purposes of instructing the inhabitants in the ways of their new technology. And historical records now show Raman the Pharaoh's ancestors left a fascinating, primarily visual language carved into the stone walls of pyramids and other monuments they constructed on planet Earth for purposes of elucidating and enlightening the inhabitants, technicians, and psychic of the planet Earth. These instructions for this nearly magical set of technologies were well understood at the time, but due to an unfortunate and unpredicted series of calamities, this knowledge and the way to decipher the primarily visual symbols called hieroglyphs were lost. And other than these visual writings being quite entertaining, nobody actually knew or understood what they meant. So instead of realizing they were technological descriptions, explanations, and instructions, the current group of Earth inhabitants, archaeologists, and ornithologists thought the hieroglyphs were telling the story about bird-like entities who traveled to Earth from a planet where everyone tended to look like birds. These visitors, who looked like birds, had traveled in the minds of archaeologists, linguists, and ornithologists from the planet they named Falcon, and were presumed to be flying around ancient Earth, performing magical stunts and other unusual occurrences for purposes nobody actually understood. Most likely because it never happened, and even if it had happened, it would not have made much, if any, sense. On Raman the Pharaoh's planet, something similar hundreds, if not thousands of years later had occurred, and there were descriptions, explanations, and instructions on the walls carved in stone of some of the pyramids. In particular, these descriptions, explanations, and instructions contain the complete and total information necessary to stop the series of plagues and pestilence and to provide life-saving medication and concoction for Raman the Pharaoh himself and the people of his planet. This was the reason Berticello Lopotamus had traveled from his planet to Raman the Pharaoh's planet for purposes of decoding, interpreting, and conveying to Raman the Pharaoh and his technical advisors and psychics exactly what to do when Berticello Lopotamus inadvertently landed his spaceship atop a small container of tuna fish that Cleopatra the cat was enjoying at the time. An unfortunate event for Berticello Lopotamus. But fortunately, Raman the Pharaoh's planet had outstanding cat healing and psychic surgery services available at all times. So it was just a matter of getting Cleopatra the cat safely delivered to a cat healer and psychic surgeon for purposes of retrieving Berticello Lopotamus' tiny spaceship from Cleopatra the cat's body without causing Cleopatra the cat any distress or injury. Certainly what everyone involved considered to be a worthy and reasonable action. the 24th chapter of Extreme Gravity, Raman the Pharaoh. Stay tuned for the next chapter, Dream 9 and the Pretend FBI. This has been brought to you by the fabulously fabulous